I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for March the 13th, 2026. Today on our Theology Roundup, as announced yesterday, we're going to be taking a trip down memory lane. Spring break 1996, becoming Messianic fully. Now, before we get into that, I would like to just briefly note for you, because over the past several weeks, we've gone through a number of series. One discussing one law, one Torah theology, then discussing Micah 4, 1 through 3, Isaiah 2, 2 through 4, the nations streaming to Zion, and then recently sorting through native, sojourner, God's people today. And of course, you can go back into the archives, watch, and listen to those episodes. But I know some of you are thinking, as we have demonstrated, a negative disposition toward one law theology, yet we recognize that there are scores of non-Jewish believers whom God has supernaturally directed into the Messianic community. The nations are streaming to Zion to be taught from God's Torah. And we have to recognize that there's some big things up in store for our biblical interpretation as it regards native in ancient Israel, sojourner in ancient Israel, and properly applying various Torah instructions in a post-resurrection context. Okay, with all that recognized, a number of you are probably wondering, okay, I see a lot of people out there who are negatively disposed to one law, one Torah theology. Obviously, they've missed it on the statements, one law for the native or the sojourner. That's small L law regarding specific areas of legislation where a sojourner could have been taken advantage of. There's a lot of bad fruit in terms of legalism and inflexibility, and there's a lot of judgmentalism. Okay, I get that. But then there are people out there critical who say, well, Galatians 5, 2, and 3, only Jewish people and proselytes have an obligation to keep the whole law. And 1 Corinthians 7, 17, and 18, Paul's rule, remain in the life condition to which you were assigned. McKee, what do I do with that? Well, I want it to be made clear that you can hold to a negative disposition of one law theology. You can recognize that in our day, the nations are streaming to Zion to be taught from God's Torah as a work of the Holy Spirit as people grow in faith and sanctification. And you can also recognize that some of the critics have not done their job fully either. So last year, if you can rewind just a bit, we actually did on several live episodes of Messianic Insider, we addressed Galatians 5, 2 to 3, actually Galatians 5, 1 through 4, and how it's really a debtor to do the whole law, which is a negative disposition, and it would result in a loss of salvation. And we also did a two-part series on 1 Corinthians 7, 17 through 24. It's abide in the calling to which you were called. That is a calling to salvation and sanctification. And Paul's rule is actually 1 Corinthians 7, 17 through 24. Both passages are exegetically loaded. They are not simple to sort through because of some of the statements made. So, if you will, you can go to the Messianic Apologetics website, click on the Frequently Asked Questions tab right there. I'll just show you where these are listed. Go down to the letter G. Actually, we're in C, so we'll do that first. So you see 1 Corinthians 7, 17 through 24. Click that, and a frequently asked question entry will open up in PDF. And then likewise, you can go down to the letter G, Galatians 5, 2 to 3, and a PDF file will open up so you can look at those things. And when this episode is archived later today, you will see links to all of that. And I've also just gone ahead into the file and posted the video from YouTube for each of those, actually the 3 videos for each of those back episodes. So we have addressed it, and do not accept overly simplistic approaches. And simply because I might have some different opinions, a different point of view than what Messianic Jewish bilateral ecclesiology tends to present, that doesn't mean Jewish and non-Jewish believers are exactly the same. But the issues, Galatians 5:2-3, the Galatians being pressured or coerced to go through proselyte circumcision. They would make themselves debtors to do the whole law based on likely commitments and oaths they would make. And when found keeping the Torah, breaking it, they would be subject to the curse of the Torah, which obviously Yeshua has released the redeemed from. That's why it would result in a loss of salvation. 1 Corinthians 7:17-24, abide in the calling to which you were called. Paul absolutely forbade Jewish believers from going through episposm, removing the mark of circumcision, because it would mean that they would what? They would apostatize. Look at the Maccabean crisis. Likewise, he absolutely forbade the non-Jewish believers to go through with circumcision as proselytes to Judaism, because it would foment this idea that you have to be circumcised in order to be saved. But those are very complicated passages, and we've already addressed them. So you can go afterward, you can read those articles, FAQ entries, and watch the different teachings. But do not accept simple interpretations because there are a lot of those which circulate online. They are from people who have not adequately studied Greek. That is one of the, of course, major weak suits of today's Messianic community. We have a lot of people who don't know Greek. They study Hebrew, but they don't study Greek. That's unacceptable. And in this case, if you're going to put as much weight into some of these passages as you think they deserve, you better have some Greek exegesis behind it. And when that is conducted, you find that some people have deliberately made some overstatements. They have embellished things when, if they had some better Greek skills, they wouldn't be able to do that. Okay. Today, I said we were going to have a brief conversation about spring break 1996 and becoming Messianic fully. So right now, we are in mid-March 2026. What this means for a lot of people right now is that spring break is upon them, whether they're in elementary school, middle school, high school, college. This is about the time when people go on spring break. And in 1996, at about this time, I don't remember what the exact dates were, but this is the season. I was in 9th grade. I was a freshman in high school. Our family had been involved in Messianic things in terms of attending the local Messianic Jewish congregation, Baruch Hashem, in Dallas at the time, for about 6 months. My parents started attending around the fall high holidays, Rosh Hashanah. They took my sister Jane and I to a number of Shabbat services. They were mainly attending on Shabbat, sometimes on the Friday night, and then we were all going to church on Sunday. So this was a transitionary period for us. As 1996 started, they would go to the Messianic congregation. Jane and I would attend as well, not as frequently as they did. And then we'd be going to church on Sunday. But by the time spring break 1996 rolled around, that's when the momentum was very clearly pulling everybody into weekly Messianic congregational attendance, and the church thing was just kind of falling off. So at the start of spring break 1996, now remember, this is 30 years ago. This is a much different time than we have right now. My parents took us all up to Kansas City for a few days over a long weekend because they were at the time involved in Amway. Okay. Uh, and there was a big convention up in Kansas City, and they were going to be attending the convention. It was a really nice hotel downtown with a lot of shopping and a lot of nice restaurants, and had a nice big giant pool, both inside and outdoor. There were a lot of activities for us to do at the hotel while they were at the conference over a few days. So it was about a 9-hour drive from Dallas to Kansas City, and on the drive up there, my mother, again, this is 1996, she was reading an article from Messiah magazine, First Fruits of Zion, about the kosher dietary laws. And up to this point, while we were attending the Messianic congregation, we definitely saw a value in being enriched by the weekly Torah portions, the Shabbat service, the festivals of Israel. And we wanted to respect some of the dietary preferences of the people at our congregation we were visiting and attending. So that meant that you brought a biblically kosher dish to fellowship meal times. And certainly we would have, as we went to different gatherings, we wouldn't have expected to see pork or shellfish. And that wasn't a huge deal. But that article convicted my mother that kosher was something we needed to start taking seriously as well. And it wasn't something I agreed with. As soon as we got to the hotel, we checked in before they went off to their convention. We went down to where some of the restaurants were, and there was an order out place. And of course, what did I order immediately? Bacon cheeseburger with barbecue sauce on it. When we returned home from that convention, that's when my mother took it upon herself to remove pork and shellfish products from the refrigerator. And that's when my parents began not only committing us fully to the Messianic lifestyle, but doing things which at the time I didn't think were necessary. I mean, you can still eat this stuff and be saved, right? And I know that one of the reasons why I got into later, apologetic studies of certain things, in particular, like we have, an 820-page resource today called the Messianic Kosher Helper. There's nothing like it in today's Messianic community. The reason I got into a lot of this was to be convinced myself that these were important things believers needed to be considering, because I asked a lot of questions and got some, I'll just say it politely, substandard answers. And a lot of them would involve things like, well, Yeshua says in Matthew 5 that he came to fulfill, not abolish the Torah. Okay, I agree with that. But what do you do with things like Romans chapter 14, for example? In fact, I didn't get an adequate answer for Romans chapter 14 until I ended up going to seminary and taking several classes on Romans, and had to orient my understanding of Romans toward it being a letter addressing real issues on the ground that the Roman believers were facing, like what to eat or what not to eat during fellowship meal times. So we did start making some changes in 1996, returning back from that trip to Kansas City. And this also intersected with a number of changes which took place in my own life regarding school attendance, which I'll get into in just a moment. Several months transpired, March, April, into May. This is when we found out, this would have been early April, mid-May, early to mid-May. That's when we found out that the Christian school I was attending, and at the time, it was my two stepsisters and then my sister Jane and me who were attending the school, because my stepfather wanted us to all attend the same place. He wanted it to be equitable to all of us, but economically it was not feasible. And also it was not a good fit for me at all. If we hadn't found out that, look, this is not a good thing for the budget, I would have gone to my mother, I would have gone to my parents and said, look, I need to go to the high school, the regular high school. And by the way, that is what ended up happening. I'll get to more of that in just a moment. But there were some changes taking place in just my own life. As a 15-year-old, you start we moved to Dallas in 1994, started at the junior high school, then went to the Christian school the next year. So starting over, 2 years in a row, basically. And that didn't work out. And then finding out that you have to go to yet another school, actually the same high school that the junior high school would have fed into. That was occurring. And so I was very open to, by that time, okay, so changes are taking place. Let's give this Messianic thing a try. By May of 1996, we had started encountering some of the prophetic speculation and time speculation, some of it rooted in the 1993 Middle East Peace Accord, which was expecting to materialize 1997 by the end of the millennium. And it was because of that, I think more than anything else, that in the summer of 1996, my parents, Mark and Margaret Huey, they ended up traveling up to Grantham, Pennsylvania, with my two sisters, Jane and Maggie, to attend the Messiah Conference in 1996. And then later, that same summer, they flew up to Sturbridge, Massachusetts, and they attended the UMJC Conference. And as they will, okay, we just went off for a moment. Anyway, 1996, it was their belief, having attended the MJAA conference and then later the UMJC conference, that the MJAA was to be regarded as more spirit-filled, and the UMJC promoted much more of a systematic theology. And Baruch Hashem, at the time, 1996 was a UMJC congregation, and so a lot of my early exposure to the Messianic lifestyle, Messianic Judaism, and Jewish believers, non-Jewish believers, was with a UMJC slant to it. It wasn't until much later, when we moved back to North Texas, 2012, 2013, 2014, that I began to be exposed to more the MJAA style myself. Now, I did not attend, even though my sisters went in 1996 to the MJA conference, Grantham, Pennsylvania. They met a lot of people. They got involved in the dance program, the YMJA youth program. I didn't get involved with that because instead I went on a 10-day personal trip back to Greater Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, and visited my old friends, and went to see the Cincinnati Reds play at Riverfront Stadium, went to Kings Island, went to the Florence Mall, checked out some of my old places, which I had moved from around 2 years earlier. And it was actually my opinion at the time that because of some pending possible end time events, this would have been one last time for me to visit my old homestead. Of course, that proved to not be the case. But that was part of the difficult lesson we had to learn in some of our early days of being Messianic. Now, as I mentioned, 1996 was the year when I was changing schools. So I had attended, for my freshman year of high school, 1995, 1996, I attended Trinity Christian Academy with my two stepsisters and my sister Jane. Not to put that school down, but it was not a positive experience for me at the time. I did learn some things about, particularly in history class, about ancient Near Eastern civilization, the Greeks, the Romans, learned about the Septuagint, learned about the Maccabees. That was definitely preparatory for things I would need to know later on. But it wasn't a great experience for me, and it was expensive. So that's why school year of 1996 started with me attending Lake Highlands High School in Dallas. So if you're from Dallas area, you know all about Lake Highlands. And it's a major, at least back then, it was a really, really good high school. and it would, of course, fed into some major universities later on. But in the process of going to my sophomore year, starting over again, even though I had known some people from Forest Meadow Junior High School who fed in, so it wasn't completely foreign to me. But we had this kind of end time expectation cloud over us. And it was because of our being involved in something new, the Messianic Jewish movement, connecting to the Messianic lifestyle, and some of the end time expectations. Why, at the end of the fall semester 1996, we ended up leaving the rental situation my parents were in North Dallas and moving up to a house in McKinney. And so for the second semester of my sophomore year, 10th grade, I started at McKinney High School. So within the scope of 3.5 years of, or I'm sorry, 3.5 school years, had to start over. Then I had to start over, and then I had to start over twice. So when I was, and then later, 1998, there was the Honduras experience, but we won't get into that in this live stream. But yeah, my high school experience, start over, then start over, then start over. And so, and there was this kind of this end time cloud over us. And yeah, we made mistakes as it concerned the last days. Some of the things which were being prognosticated upon did not materialize. And we came to some presumptuous conclusions. But it did force us into the word like never before. And today, when you look back on some of that experience regarding people coming out with end time predictions, the Middle East Peace Accord, Yitzhak Rabin, Yasser Arafat, various others, we could have, when certain things didn't materialize, we could have gotten very angry, very bitter, decided to throw out the whole end time expectation of Scripture, just, that mindset of it'll just pan out in the end. Some of you all are familiar with that. But we learned to look into things in a little more detail. I know that because of when some of these things took place and having to start over multiple times during my high school years, I don't come to conclusions very easily now. You have to really provide me with some evidence. But I also know, look at what's happening in the world today. There are not a lot of people paying attention, because a lot of people a little further on at the turn of the millennium and immediately thereafter in the 2000 aughts, they were subjected to the recalculations for some of the things we encountered 1996, 1997. And then they just ended up, throwing out the prophetic message of Scripture. And that's not good. That's not right. Now, one of the things you may not always know, because some people would conclude, and maybe this is looking back on it 30 years now. I mean, college was, the fact that I was able to go to college and then later go to seminary, that was very, very important. Of course, I made some mistakes then too. But those years, 1996, 1997, that was in some way the most transformative or changing period of my life, in some ways even more than 1992 and my father passed away. Because when we moved from North Dallas to McKinney, and then we got put on this very interesting path after that, that's when we took the off-ramp to the Messianic community. Because up until then, we could have continued, we could have stayed in North Dallas. We could have seen, okay, these prophecy expectations didn't come to pass. We could have continued going to the Messianic congregation. And then what would have happened with me is I would have gotten, by the second semester, I would have, Lake Highlands, had that occurred, not McKinney High School, I would have gotten fully integrated into the different evangelical Christian groups with different evangelical believers. And yeah, so I would have still been going to the Messianic congregation, but I would have been visiting with my friends' churches. We would have done activities together. And then later on, there would have been a group of us who would have gone to College X, University X, likely here in the state of Texas. And then what would that have involved? It would have involved, dating, marriage, etc. But I would not have been involved in full-time Messianic ministry. So I still think back on 1996, 1997, more so than 1992, my father's death, and more so than any other time period uh, since then. And this is having been in Messianic ministry now since, you know, 2003, so 23 years, because that was the time when we took the off ramp. And look, being Messianic, you've got to be called into it. If you're not Jewish, you've got to be divinely summoned. And I can tell you that. Now, if you want to know a little more, because this was the time 30 years ago we started to make the commitment to become Messianic fully. And you can look at our story. You can see what God has done, the experiences we've had, how those experiences affect us now in resolving some of the controversies which are out there, resolving some of the matters which people don't bother to investigate a little more thoroughly. You can look at our story in more detail. Go to and there'll be a link provided for you where I go into much more, much more detail. Click on the articles tab and scroll down to the article, My Family's Messianic Experience, 1995 to 2022. And yes, there are 4 more years I could discuss more, but that mainly has to do with updating some of our materials and some of the questions of the post-pandemic, post-election 2020 world. But you can get a lot of information from this. And yes, I definitely go into the, oh, here, I do open it up. I definitely go into the, let me scroll down here. Yes, 1995, 1996, early Messianic days, which is some of what I've just described here, and 1997 to 1999 end time speculation. But more frequently than not, non-Jewish believers who have been not just called, but divinely summoned by the Lord, they've got some kind of significant story which goes along with why they're in the Messianic community. It's not just a matter of, I was reading the Sermon on the Mount and I saw that, well, the law of Moses, the Torah, remains in effect for today in some significant way, or I want to partake of Yeshua, Jesus, and the feast more. No, there's usually some kind of, I'm going to say, small d drama, which has facilitated your involvement in the Messianic community, because some of those experiences, some of that drama affects why you're here and affects your skill set, your gifts, talents, discernment, abilities, which are needed for this time. Because some of those experiences we had in 1995, 1996, 1997, that's why I don't jump on to immediately, I'm going to just say it, the Jonathan Cahn bandwagon like a lot of people do. I'll hear him out. He's no prophet. He's an exegetical basket case, but he will raise important points which affect people. So I'm a Jonathan Cahn skeptic like a lot of other people. The latest end time theory, the latest end time prediction. Okay, I might be willing to hear it out, but I have seen previous things in the past. At the same time, we don't want to dismiss when we are. I mean, the biggest thing we're having to confront right now, especially since October the 7th, 2023, involves what? Growing anti-Semitism, growing anti-Zionism, growing anti-Judaism, and it is increasing. We just had a major incident in West Bloomfield, Michigan, at the largest or one of the largest Reform synagogues in the United States of America. We didn't have a lot of this going on back in 1996, 1997, that time frame, but we've got it going on now. And so in some ways, 1995, 1996, especially for my sister Jamie, because the high school years, those teenage years, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, they are more transformative in some ways than the college years are. But those years and having to start over, like almost every year at a new school, at a new place. My 2 stepsisters didn't have that. My sister Maggie didn't have that. it inculcated in us certain lessons. And no, that's not ideal for your transcript. It's not ideal for your grades. It's not ideal for your social life. It's not ideal for your circle of friends. I can attest that it probably affected, me and dating and marriage and all that. And my view and some of my viewpoints on that. But having to start over year, um, it also gives you the ability to adapt very quickly and to change or to make alterations very quickly, because that the setting in which you were in, you can't take it for granted. Um, People who are in the military, they have to have that same ability. They know, of course, right now we've got Operation Epic Fury, Operation Roaring Lion. Someone who's in the military, they're at home right now with their husband, with their wife. They could get the order, hey, we're going on deployment tomorrow. Pack your things. We'll pick you up at 0700, whatever it is. And they could be on the other side of the planet within 36 hours. So some of these experiences, no, they were not ideal in some ways, but they were transformative, and they give me some unique abilities which others do not have. And they give me a unique perspective which others do not have. Of course, all of us in our lives, if we could go back and tell our previous self, hey, don't make that decision, we would do so. Or we tell our parents, do you know the reverberating effect this is going to have on your son or your daughter? But that's life. And I would say that while some of the early Messianic experiences I had, we made mistakes, we fell on our face, we said things we needed to pull back. We learned from it. That's one of the major reasons we got the kind of ministry we've got. One of the major reasons I've got the kind of personality I've got. And don't take anything for granted. Don't, I would say, generally speaking, I've got closure from some of those early Messianic days. But from time to time, I'm reminded of something. And I've been increasingly reminded of it these past 13 years, because if you trace our journey, McKinney, then going to Honduras for a while, going to Norman, Oklahoma for a while, then going to Central Florida for a while, and then moving back 13 years ago, first to, of all places, the Lake Highlands area, North Dallas. And then after that, McKinney again. So, I drive by McKinney High School, several times a week. When we were down in North Dallas, drove by Lake Highlands High School a few times, certainly Forest Meadow Junior High School a number of times a month. So yeah, I mean, back in that same sphere of influence. And I'm glad I'm here in North Texas. The Texas Take Two experience is much different than Texas Take One. It's been very positive and it's been very therapeutic. But I do remember, especially this time of year and now 30 years on, how that 1996 going into 1997 year really changed things. And our Messianic experience has always been connected to prophecy. It's always been connected to the return of the Lord. I would have difficulty from time to time fully staying in the Messianic community if it were not for that being connected to the end times, because you can find a good evangelical church which supports Israel, supports the Jewish people, do Sabbath at home, do the festivals at home, eat a kosher style diet, and probably get a much more rigorous regimen of discipleship in Jesus, learning how to live like Jesus. You'd certainly get a lot more better teaching about family matters, marriage, child rearing. It'd be much more balanced than a lot of the quasi patriarchy you get from time to time. But that's not the time. But that is not the time in which we're living right now for a number of people. The time in which we're living is one where doing messianic things on the side, I mean, if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. You need to be in close fellowship with Messianic Jewish believers. If you're not Jewish, they're going to need you in the days ahead to help them in ways which some of you all are already aware of. What's the goal of our ministry? Helping provide stability helping to calm people down because of experiences we've had in the past. Others of you, you're going to know what some of those gifts and talents and skills are in the coming days. The Lord is going to birth them within you. Okay, so this won't be the last time we talk about some of our early Messianic experiences. I'll see what else we can discuss in the coming year as we go back 30 years in our memory bank and as the Lord prompts different things. But it was about this time, spring break, 1996, and it set us on a very unique path. And every year I kind of relive it in a way. I mean, just like I kind of relive my father's cancer, 1992. But as I've gotten older, this is the year for me, which was more transformative than even 1992 was, because we took the off ramp to becoming Messianic. And I know all of you have your own interesting story as to how the Lord directed you into the Messianic community. Messianic Jewish believers certainly have unique testimonies of how they came to faith in Yeshua, how they got involved in the Messianic movement, and some of the struggles and difficulties they face. But it's all part of our ongoing conversation. And sometimes it's necessary to reflect on these experiences so we can learn, we can acknowledge mistakes we've made, so they do not have to be repeat, so others don't have to make them, and that we can look ahead and see, okay, while I went through some difficulty at the time, I went through some painful experiences at the time, I'm that much stronger a person because of it. And I can be a real aid in the coming difficulty, which, of course, we doubtlessly see. Okay, so let's move over now to our news roundup. Okay, so we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is, of course, time sensitive and it changes from day to day. And right now, with Operation Epic Fury, Operation Roaring Lion, things are literally changing from hour to hour. So what we discuss can only be regarded as a number of the high points, a number of the significant things which we have to take notice of. Without any doubt, as we continue in our faith experience, as we continue with what is going on, the Lord is going to certainly prompt us to press into Him in greater detail and press into what He would have us do and acknowledge. Okay. All right. So all the news stories I'm about to go through, these will be available for you to look at later today when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net, where you can access the different news stories. You can look at them in greater detail. You can read them in further detail, watch the different clips, etc., whatever it is. Along with this, we need to be, number one, always in prayer for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia, Ukraine. Number three, be praying for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. And of course, we've got the situation in Iran, which started almost 2 weeks ago, even though things were building up and we were anticipating certain things to occur. But now, of course, we have to really be considering how long this conflict's going to last, what is being reported. And as I've said, the news changes from hour to hour. Okay, our first news story, and this concerns what took place, and we talked about it yesterday when we went live. So a lot of things have come out from the active shooting at Temple Israel Synagogue in West Bloomfield, Michigan. This is from Visegrad 24/1242 yesterday. The synagogue describes itself as the largest Reform Jewish congregation in the United States. Okay, so and that would be in the greater Detroit area. Here's another story about it from Open Source Intel Defender. Of course, there's a 20-second clip here. 12:25 p.m. reports of a serious incident ongoing at Temple Israel, a Reformed Jewish synagogue and school in West Bloomfield, Michigan. So this is a large Jewish synagogue. Some descriptions have it the largest in the United States, but it's large, which means whether we like it or not, it is a target. Okay, next story. This is also Visegrad 24, 2:04 p.m. yesterday. So while we were concluding, the war in Iran has entered a new stage. Israeli strikes are creating conditions where mass mobilization becomes feasible for the Iranian people to reclaim the streets. And the question asked, is it the beginning of the end for the Islamist regime? Now, that's going to be a question which is asked continually throughout this whole ordeal. Are we going to see an end? When are we going to see an end to potential conflict? Okay. Okay, next story, open source intel. This was posted 2:45 p.m. and there's a 39-second clip. Yes, it's Al Jazeera. Netanyahu on Mujtaba Khamenei and Naim Qassem. I believe there will be surprises. I must keep some of the combat fog at this press conference. What I can tell you is that we have the upper hand far more than we anticipated, and we will achieve all our objectives. So at least from this report, the Prime Minister of Israel, similar to President Trump, we're ahead of schedule, we're achieving our objectives, and we expect there to be victory. Now, how much of that is accurate, how much of that is inaccurate, we don't know yet. That's why we continue to pray for a quick, decisive resolution to this Iranian situation. Okay, our next story. This is from the Epoch Times yesterday, March the 12th. The headline, police respond to active shooter incident at synagogue in Michigan. The FBI has responded to the incident at the Temple Israel synagogue. Okay, so that was one of the first stories I saw once we concluded yesterday and started, seeing reports about the synagogue in Michigan. Okay, here's another story along with that. Excuse me, from Open Source Intel Defender, 1:40 p.m. After a shooting occurred at a Reformed Jewish synagogue in West Bloomfield, Michigan, the suspect is now dead after exchanging gunfire with security guards that ended with the security guard being injured. Yes, at the time of writing, there are no reports of fatalities, and I do believe that continues to be the case. Okay, a few more posts on the issue at the synagogue from Eyal Yacobi yesterday at 1:13 p.m. And there's a 2-minute, 10-second clip. Michigan sheriff says 0 injuries reported after synagogue shooting, except for potentially the shooter. And his remark, thank God the security stopped what could have been a massacre. Absolutely. But the timing on this should not escape our notice. You have occurring in the Middle East right now, Operation Epic Fury, Operation Roaring Lion. Already, we reported a number of weeks ago that should there be a conflict in Iran, Israel, the United States, you should expect there to be some kind of a rise in anti-Semitic incidents, correct? Well, guess what? This was doubtlessly an anti-Semitic incident. Okay, so with that said, here is another report, which is, I think, very important to keep in mind as it regards this situation, forwarded on by Andrew Colvett, who is a Turning Point USA spokesman, according to his description. 25-second clip. He says, this is an interesting piece of information. The FBI in Detroit held an active shooter training at Temple Israel, the scene of today's attack just 6 weeks ago. And he says, wow. Okay, so what makes this important to keep in mind is right now at Messianic congregations, synagogues, probably churches as well. They're going to be people who they see this having taken place, and they, with their security team, with their staff, are going to have to discuss, okay, what are we going to do should something like this occur at our place, right? Uh, Now, every Messianic congregation I've been a part of has had some kind of security team, security detail, and many of them, you know who they are. Some of them, you don't know who they are. Other congregations might actually hire a police officer, or they may actually hire security. I've also been in some meetings with different people regarding, okay, what are you going to do about when this happens or when that happens? I've been at congregational meetings, and some people, they get really afraid and they get really concerned very quickly. Other people, oh, that's never going to happen. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Or, you're trying to fear monger. And then you see something like this at a major Jewish synagogue, Reformed temple here in the United States. One of the ongoing questions, and actually at the IMCS Rabbis Conference, 2 months ago, there was a presentation on this. But one of the big questions a lot of people have in Messianic congregations, synagogues is, why are we not able to have our own building? Many Messianic congregations meet in churches, or they meet in elementary schools. They rent someplace. They have a storefront. Many wonder, why can't we get our own place? Is it we're just not attracting enough people with enough resources? Okay, there's always going to be that question. But for the Messianic congregation, which meets in a church, which meets in an elementary school or someplace else, and doesn't have, Messianic congregation XYZ on the front, maybe part of that is so people can stay protected from incidents like this. Have you ever thought of that? I know some people don't want to think along those lines, but I would start thinking along those lines. And how many congregations, how many synagogues, which have been praying or hoping for a building, they've been praying for their own facility, how many of them may not get it because of something like this, and that God is actually protecting them? Have you ever thought about that before? And I know some people don't want to necessarily think along those lines, but it's something which I think more need to be thinking about. You might not get the building of your dreams because of that growing possibility of an act of violence. Nobody said being the end time move of God was easy. All right, from the Epic Times. I'm sorry. No, this is from open source. No, this is from Visegrad 24. Sorry about that. This came immediately after the issue in Michigan, posted at 2:37 p.m. in their 7-second clip. Breaking: heavily armed police guarding the synagogue in Oslo. So that's Norway, after a security incident. One man arrested, and the police are chasing a second suspect after reports of shots fired in front of the synagogue. Okay, now this is, of course, Norway. This is not the United States, but yeah, Messianic people need to take note of this. Pray for safety. Pray for God's supernatural protection. I pray for it every day. Okay, from the Epic Times. This is yesterday. U.S. knows location of most Iranian sleeper cells inside America, Trump says. We've got our eye on all of them, Trump said. Well, I hope you do. And I hope that no one I know is directly or indirectly affected by potential acts of terrorism, vandalism, or violence because of Operation Epic Fury. From open source intel. Okay. This is from yesterday, 12:54, 1 minute, 28 seconds. I got this after our stream. Reza Pahlavi, that's the exiled crown prince, urged Iranians to stay indoors and avoid regime sites, warning that the battle against the Islamic Republic has entered its final phase. Okay. He didn't say next phase here, final phase. He said decisive days are ahead and called on citizens to remain alert and prepared while the struggle reaches a critical stage. Okay. So, at least from this report, we're hearing that the Iranian conflict is getting ready to enter into yet another phase of some sort. Okay, we will see. We will see. From Visegrad 24, change gears a little bit. 3:17 p.m. yesterday, Bloomberg writes that Western intelligence agencies have discovered that Russia is helping Iran's attacks against the U.S., Israel, and Gulf allies by sharing intelligence such as satellite imagery and drone targeting tactics. Okay, we don't fully know what that might involve. We don't fully know how that is going to affect, once this conflict is over, resolution or hopeful resolution to the Russia-Ukraine war, which has now been going on for over 4 years. From the Epoch Times yesterday, Energy Secretary says U.S. looking to escort tankers in Strait of Hormuz by end of month. It'll happen relatively soon, but it can't happen now, says Secretary Chris Wright. Okay, and that would obviously involve the deployment of more U.S. Navy and allies to guard the steady supply of oil and gas out of the Persian Gulf. And while, a country like the United States, I mean, we've got, our own domestic oil and gas, a lot of that oil and gas that goes out of the Persian Gulf, it goes to markets like, and I know right now a lot of us have been thinking about, China being cut off from cheap oil and gas from Iran, but a lot of that oil and gas goes to Japan. It goes to South Korea. It goes to our allies in Asia who don't have the kind of natural resources that the United States does. And that, of course, has a reverberating effect on the global economy. Okay, from Breitbart yesterday, there's the president, President Trump. We'd like to see a leader in Iran who can build a country. The 47th president stated he'd like the next leader of Iran to be someone who can build a country. Okay. And of course, a lot of the main attention has been focused on the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Now, there's no guarantee, nor is there a requirement that he be the one who leads Iran when this is all said and done. No requirement at all. But at the same time, there is a lot of expectation that he probably will be, one of the main people involved in what occurs. So we'll wait and see what happens. Okay, our next story. And we're going to focus on the highlights here because there's a lot of speculation regarding Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent press broadcast. So here, you see someone concluding in this 47-second clip here, we will reach the kingdom. We will make it to the return of the Messiah. Open source intel, which is an Israeli source, notes how this is a fake translation. He says nothing about kingdom and the Messiah. But that went haywire all over social media saying, you missed your Messiah, you crucified him, and you're cursed. Christ is king. There are a lot of posts like that. Okay, here's an article just to get the tenor of, test the barometer of when we are and what people are saying and what's going on. But here you have from Zero Hedge, and this does, they do post some things from the alt-right from time to time, but we do want to stay up to date with what people are saying. Nearly 1/3 of people living in North America believe that world will end during their lifetimes. Okay, I absolutely believe that over the past few years, especially since the pandemic, which started 6 years ago, and the lockdowns from 6 years ago, that we have taken some giant leaps forward toward the return of Yeshua over the past year, over the past several years. But I do not want to be presumptuous, having learned things from 1996 and 1997. I do not want us to be presumptuous about when we are, what's going on, etc. But yes, I do believe that we're getting closer. But the return of Yeshua is going to bring worldwide peace and shalom, the restoration of Israel, the restoration of the kingdom. Yes, there's going to be some terrible things, but the result of it is going to be what God's people should be praying for every day. Thy kingdom come. Okay, so here's an important thing to recognize how, because we report on these stories, and as I've said before, when we report things which are anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist, we don't have a comprehensive solution today in terms of, Lord, should I write a book? Should I put out a lot of FAQ entries? What should we do? But we are cataloging these things and we're reporting on them so you do not get caught unaware. So this is from Shane Schatzel, his channel on X. He is a Roman Catholic. He talks about how, please take the time to watch these 2 short videos. This is below. That's Netanyahu. Netanyahu is being very candid here. Speaking in Hebrew, he is telling Israelis and all Zionists everywhere that with the fall of Iran, the Zionist state, he didn't say Israel, will become a regional superpower with global recognition and prepare for the coming of the Jewish Messiah. Okay. And his conclusion, scroll down just a little bit. We are witnessing the final setup for the last days. However, I wouldn't expect the Zionist superpower to develop overnight, and Netanyahu is telling his people the same. He's saying it will take time, but now that Iran is out of the way, Israel can annex the West Bank and begin eyeing conquest further east toward Iraq and southwest toward Egypt. He concludes, this is why Trump's Abraham Accords are so important, because what is needed is an Arab coalition to contain Zionist ambitions. And he's got his own book, which I have not read. And of course, we just monitor these things. We've talked about, and a lot of other people are talking about, the whole greater Israel thing. And what are the biblical borders of the promised land? Do they basically make up huge chunks of Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Egypt and Jordan and all this? Or is it just several times larger than the current state of Israel? It all comes down to where you interpret the Euphrates River. Do you look at the Euphrates River going all the way up into Syria, and from that northeasternly point, go down into the land, the current state of Israel, or does it go all the way basically to Kuwait? I don't believe that the map, which people like to circulate, Greater Israel, is accurate at all, because it would involve territory that the patriarch Abraham was actually told to leave. From 2C TV, March the 12th, last night, 9:41 p.m., and there's a 2-minute, 50-second clip. The IDF has released new footage showing drones striking IRGC checkpoints across Tehran, targeting posts set up to control the streets and prevent a potential uprising. Scroll down just a little bit. Meanwhile, the Islamic Republic state media appears to be addressing the nation with an empty chair standing in for the supreme leader. Yeah, the question is, what is going to come next? I mean, there's a new supreme leader, but we haven't seen him in person, in flesh and blood, addressing the people of Iran. Likewise, the exiled crown prince has said that we're entering into a final stage. The situation changes hour to hour, day to day. From Hanania Naftali, 19-second clip. Iranian missile hits near Al-Aqsa Mosque and Western Wall in Jerusalem. The Iranian regime fired missiles at Jerusalem. One of them fell near the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. And Naftali rightly points out, Israel protects all religions. The regime targets everyone, including Muslims in Israel. This is unacceptable. But that post got, again, a lot of conspiracy people going. Israel is going to let the Iranians accidentally, quote unquote, hit the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's going to get blown off the Temple Mount, and it'll give the Temple Mount faithful the opportunity to rebuild the third temple. Most prophecy people do not believe that scenario is going to happen. They believe, especially as a sign of religious ecumenicism and the future anti-Messiah, Antichrist being, the savior of all, that you're going to see the Dome of the Rock and some kind of third temple structure, or at least a tabernacle, built side by side next to each other. Okay. Okay, we've got 9 more stories, and then we will conclude. Visegrad 24 today, 3:58 a.m. The U.S. has decided to lift sanctions on Russia and allow the sale of Russian oil and petroleum products loaded onto ships from March the 12th. The new U.S. license to sell Russian oil will be valid until April the 12th and does not apply to transactions related to Iran. Of course, we don't know all the details regarding Trump's strategy ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but in the short term, Russia getting its petroleum to market, that can hopefully stabilize the supply for others who need oil, which they may not be able to get from the Persian Gulf region. I mean, that would be the logical way of looking at this. Okay. Oh, and it'll give the negotiating team in the Russia-Ukraine conflict hopefully some leverage with the Russian government. We let you do this. Now, what are you going to give us in return? Tusi, noting some of the statements of Candace Owens. Candace Owens yesterday said, inevitably, Israel will do this to American cities and towns too. This will be done to our children and our homes one day. And Tusi responds, Candace claims Israel will destroy American cities like Gaza. Forget about the obvious truth that the close ally of America will ever do this. His conclusion, the main issue is how retarded Candace is, thinking that the U.S. military is so weak that it can be destroyed by a small country. Okay, Newsmax. And this is from today, the 13th of March. The headline, Hegseth, Iran's new supreme leader wounded, disfigured. So that's the Secretary of War Secretary Pete Hegseth said on Friday, confirmed reports that Iran's new supreme leader was wounded during the U.S. military action, adding that Mojtaba Khamenei likely has been disfigured. Of course, this is the report today. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of rumor. Where is he? Is he? I don't believe he is dead, but is he going in and out of consciousness? What does he look like? What is his disposition? Another story, this is from the California Post. Do not confuse this with the New York Post, even though it's from the same publisher. Iran's new impotent supreme leader is wounded and likely disfigured, dares him to appear on camera, Hegseth. Okay, yes, and a lot of us would like to know, where is the new Ayatollah? Why can't he appear before his people in person? These are signs of a regime in collapse on some significant level when you can't have your main leader go in front of the people, especially in our day and age where all you need is a camera someplace. Or are they worried that if he comes out live that Israel will take him out? Open source Intel Defender, 11:10 a.m. today, 24-second clip. During an interview with Morning with Fox News Radio, President Trump said he now believes it is unlikely that Iranians will rise up soon against the Islamic regime. Okay, that's the report from the president today. You can read and watch it all in further detail. This is a situation which changes hour by hour, day by day. Where were we 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, the negotiations in Geneva had just concluded, and there were supposed to be negotiations the following week in Vienna. Of course, we woke up or in the middle of the night, Friday going into Saturday, Operation Epic Fury, Roaring Lion had begun. Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, getting into this whole discussion about is Yeshua, Jesus, Jewish, and commenting on Joel Webben. Okay, we referenced this yesterday, but Ted Cruz, it's truly a brain rot. Jesus was undeniably Jewish in the line of David. Any pastor should know this. The fact that we've gone Joel Webben, some figure on the alt-right, hyper-supersessionist, He's not sure whether or not Jesus is Jewish. He was talking to Jake Shields, who said, I will not say Jesus was Jewish. Now that we got somebody as high profile as Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, a presidential candidate having to respond to Joel Webbon. Okay, that is how serious this whole issue of the Jewish roots of the faith, our faith heritage in the scriptures of Israel, and the issue of Israel is going to be in these end times. Okay, 3 more stories. This is from today at 10:13 a.m., 21-second clip. Breaking, President Trump says he believes Russia is now helping Iran against America. And he probably thinks we're helping Ukraine, right? We help them. And so he says that, and China would say the same thing. So we know that the president, that the administration, as it concerns Operation Epic Fury, they have to take into consideration some of these other geopolitical elements, Russia, China, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This is why we pray for a quick, decisive end to this. From open source intel, 10:32 a.m. today, 44-second clip. Trump on Iran's Mojtaba Khamenei. I think he's damaged, but I think he's probably alive in some form. They've been doing a lot of talking, and so he's going to have to put up. We have to see, because we are decimating them. So the president earlier this morning says he's still alive. I believe he's still alive. I believe we would know if he were dead. But again, what condition is this new Ayatollah actually in? And what does that signal for the vitality of the Islamic Republic of Iran? Okay, and then we're going to close on a very sad story. Newsmax, U.S. military refueling plane crash in Iraq kills 6. The U.S. military says a KC-135 refueling aircraft supporting operations against Iran crashed in western Iraq, killing all 6 of its crew members. This is where we simply have to pray for the families of the deceased. Our heartfelt condolences go out to them. They were patriots. Likewise, we pray for the safety of all of our servicemen and women, sailors, soldiers, airmen, in uniform, especially serving in the theater of Operation Epic Fury. We pray for the safety of the IDF members, Israel Defense Force, our Gulf allies, all of our partners. We also pray for the civilians, not just those in Israel, those in the Gulf, but those in Iran. And we pray that this situation ends as quickly as humanly possible. That's what our prayer is and our hope is as we conclude this week. Okay, and that concludes our news roundup. Once again, you can go messianicapologetics.net. A little later, this episode will be archived. You can go look through those links yourself, watch the different clips, read the articles. We try to make sure that everything we say as it involves the news roundup is properly documented with these different stories. Because one of the things I did learn from 1996, 1997, there were a lot of people saying a lot of things about current events. They're doing this, they're doing that. And what did they never do? They never documented where they got their information from. And that is something which not only, I mean, as far as I know, you could be making things up. It's not only bad, but it's absolutely against God's Torah. God's Torah says truth is confirmed by the witness or evidence of 2 or 3. That means when you're trying to teach on something, we're trying to talk about something, you have to provide documentation for it. And if you're just going to open your mouth and start saying things and you don't provide evidence, you don't tell us where you're getting this information, these perspectives from, you have no credibility. And we saw a lot of people, the turn of the millennium, say things. They had no documentation. They had no proof. They were not engaged in any kind of contemporary discussion, whether it's current events or theology. And some of those people are still around today. Some of those people are still doing the same thing today. But Messianic Insider 5 times a week is part of an ongoing conversation, and we'll discuss some of this on a future episode. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. Please do consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. Be sure to visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions, entries. You can look at some back issues of Outreach Israel News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, etc. Be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It will definitely help its exposure on social media. And be sure to repost it to your social media feeds, Facebook, Instagram, X. Email it to a friend. We will see you again on Monday with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you. Shalom, and take care.